Okay, so Peter Kim, Social Business by Design. The good news is that I'm unemployed right now, so I don't have anything to sell you. So don't worry about being marketed to, or I've got a secret agenda. There's nothing like that. So you can ask me whatever you want, and I'll be happy to answer. I do have a book for sale downstairs at the Wiley Book Center, Social Business by Design. It's, creatively how we named the title of this session. But I'll be quite frank, all the royalties and IP of this book are owned by my former company, so you can buy it if you want, and all that money will go to my former company. And so I'd love to share the ideas with you. I'll give them all away for free here. You can buy the book if you want to follow up for more, okay? So just complete disclosure, because that's kind of the social thing, right? Let's talk about how I got here, because you guys are probably, how the hell did this guy get up on stage? Like, what are you doing here, right? So I've actually been in Boston, or I lived in Boston for a long time. I started with Fidelity back in '99. I was at Razorfish, a small internet consultancy, in 2000. I worked at Puma for a few years. I was head of global digital over there. I went back to Fidelity for a short 3 months. We can talk about career management strategies later on in a different track. I went out to KEDS, and then I was at Forrester for a few years. We talked about social computing. But in 2008, I got the startup bug, and I was employee number 1 at a startup consultancy called Dotchess Group. Jeff Dotchess co-founded Razorfish back in the mid-90s, so it all came full circle. Just so I get a sense, how many people here are from the Boston area who are in town? Okay, and how many people are from the New York metro area? Okay, good. I've got my plugs here, my ringers around. And for those of you who are in for the Hootsuite session, you may, I am obviously not going to talk about Hootsuite today, but I am the second, apparently of the third Asian males that are speaking in this room. HubSpot carved it out specifically for us. So if you want to see another guy, I think the guy from Facebook is here this afternoon. So be sure to come back for that. So I was employee number 1 at Dotchess Group, Chief Strategy Officer, and we we created this thing called Social Business. But I'd spent a lot of time in Boston. I went to school at UVA. I came up here because my wife happened to be from Boston. So some of you may know how that goes. We decided to move up to be close to her family. And the thing about Boston, where I grew up in the South, and so coming back here, I really got over the decade into things like the Red Sox, right? So New Yorkers, this is your chance to gloat. It's not even fun this year to make fun of the Red Sox because they suck so bad, but let's put it up here. And at the end of the 8th inning, in the middle of the 8th inning, Sweet Caroline, right, plays. It's a tradition at Fenway Park, so it's like these nice things. You go around and you have these New England traditions, just like. For some reason they're trying to use all the AC up that they didn't use this summer because is everybody else freezing, or is it just me in here? Yeah. So so these New England summer traditions, like going to Fenway Park. But when I took my job at Dotchess Group, the company was headquartered down in Austin, Texas, which is quite a bit pretty far away. And I said, well, Jeff, I'm going to take this job under one condition. He said, well, Pete, what's that? I said, well, you have to promise me that you're never going to make me move to Texas. I was like, Texas, right? Because we got Sweet Caroline. And down in Texas, they got, this is what they do at their 8th inning. No Sweet Caroline. They sing deep in the heart of, are there any Texans in here? Okay, please, I hope you left your guns at home because they're legal back home, but they're not here, right? So the 3 of you guys, hopefully, you're not packing heat today. If you are, for my sake, I see you getting restless, man. He's like shaking. Okay, so deep in the heart of Texas. This is from the Astros. Astros are even worse than the Red Sox, so at least we have that solace, Boston fans, to come put together. But down in Texas, there are, guns are fairly liberal and legal, and you got people who, I think this, maybe she thought this was kind of a sexy pose to be taking of herself. I went shooting, and we like to go skeet shooting and hunting and this and that. So, when you go look to buy a house in Texas, I have 2 daughters. At the time, they were 8 and 6. And, we'd be rummaging around houses, and we'd find these special little lockers, these closets. Like, Dad, what's this? My wife was like, get away from that, honey, because people have these, the gun closets. It's just a staple, like having a gun rack on the back of your truck. You have a gun locker in your house. Now, you guys, I see you laughing, but this is a common thing in Texas, right? That's just how it is. So we have our guns. We got our critters, too, to be honest. Imagine, waking up to one of these, and, you find a scorpion just sitting in your sink, your bathroom sink when you want to brush your teeth. And apparently for Texans, I don't know, have you guys ever been stung by a scorpion? But yes, right? And apparently, I have not, and I don't ever intend to be, okay? Because so like when you're up here, people say, oh, you got a mouse or two in the house. It's no big deal, right? You like, get a mouse trap, or you get your golf club and take it out. But these things, and I can't deal with these, and conversely, people in Texas apparently can't deal with like mice in the house. That's the biggest shock for them ever, right? So you've got your guns, you've got your critters, and you've got your heat. Right, this is a screenshot of my now dearly departed Volvo. I took my black on black, Volvo cross-country station wagon down to Texas with me, and you get things. You leave your car outside, it gets kind of hot, right, and you get moving, and it cools down. Well, I don't think I ever saw this in Boston, right? Here, the thermometer, I think it ran out of digits at some point, right? And thankfully, when we got moving, it got down to 110 degrees instead. So, it was kind of a relief when we got moving. So you got the guns, you got the critters, you got the heat, and compare that to Boston, where you get these nice winters of pastoral settings, right? Like you put your ivy, your holly outside, you have a nice snow-covered yard. My dogs loved it. They thought the world was edible every winter because it starts to snow. Everything is on the ground. And we love Boston so much that we actually we built a house when I was here, and that's another reason I said, well, there's no way in hell I'm ever moving to Texas, right? Because I just built a house. If you're familiar with Cohasset on the South Shore, it's a town just south of Boston. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Boston metro area, we found this great space of land. We said, we've lived in Boston for 7 years, and we lived in the Metro West, but if you live in Boston, you got to live by the ocean, right? That's the big deal about being, in this area. That's what makes all the snow and winter worth it, right? So, what we did, we figured out a plot of land, shot from Google Earth. That it's the peninsula of Hull going up to the northwest, and Cohasset is their small town right on the South Shore of Boston. We said, okay, that's the kind of place where we want to live, right? Let's find a nice street, a cul-de-sac, to make things happen. And thankfully, we found a nice little house, traditional looking cape. It's a pretty reasonable price for us. It turns out that the gentleman who had lived there for about 60 years, the original owner, had passed away and moved on, and the family was looking to sell it. So, we got this house for a pretty good price. The problem was the house inspectors, and so one more editorial comment, the house inspection market in Boston, for those of you who have bought houses and sold houses here, it's kind of a racket. No, if you have, okay, again, apologies if you have relatives in that market, but what our house inspector didn't find in the very deep, dark basement was a severe mold infestation all over the house. And so we thought, that's why whenever we're in the house, we all just start sneezing and eyes water. It's like, obviously something was wrong, because we just never dealt, you guys are like, duh. But we had never dealt with this stuff before, right? So you go in and there's mold, which is likely in the walls and all over, because these guys hadn't really maintained the house for the past 20 years or so. So what do? We ended up taking the whole thing down, right? It's like, it's actually not even worth renovating. It probably costs as much to renovate and remediate as much as to build new. We owned it, so okay, we're gonna knock this thing down. So we knocked the thing down. Of course, we have to figure out, well, what's gonna fit, right? What is there used to be a single senior citizen living there. I've got 2 kids, I've got 2 dogs. We need a little bit more space, so we planned out a nice new house with a builder there called Whitman Homes. They built a lot of the homes in the Pine Hills, so they came credentialed and said, okay, this is a livable space for a family of 4, 2 pets, right? And then you've got to figure out on this plot, you've got the old house, you've got the new house, you've got the roads. Bart happens to be the architect, the GC. Where's this new house going to fit in this plot of land, right? So we got the blueprint, we've got the lay of the land. And so when you start building a house, one of the first steps, clear out the lot, lay the foundation. So picture the foundation going up. A pretty rapid process, actually, if any of you have built a house or been in construction before. The foundation is laid out, and then the framing comes up, right? So we put in, you put in the walls, you start to put up the real shape of the house. And then you got the systems to put in, like the heating and air conditioning units, some of the guts, the finish work, it starts to take a long time when you're finishing a house. And finally, don't forget that all of this happens according to a budget, right? You've got times, you've got details, and measuring and tracking this whole process is a pretty involved and pretty important part of what this all means, right? So we went through this for 2 years and built this house down on the south shore of Cohasset. And by now, we're about 10, 12 minutes into this thing. You're saying, okay, so what the hell does this have to do with social business? Yes, yes, by the nervous laughter. You're a very polite audience. You could have just yelled out, what the hell does this have to do with social business? I mean, I'd be fine. Oh, sorry, by the way, there are mics. There's a mic, so feel free to walk up if you want to project and have a booming voice, or just yell out from your seat if you have questions. I'd be happy to stop along the way. So let's talk about what it has to do with social business, right? Because building a house is actually a lot like designing a social business. Let me tell you what I mean by that. So let's start with the social computing trends of the last decade. And I'm moving around not only because I've had too much coffee, but because I'm freezing cold, and hopefully this will warm me up, right? So we got the social computing trends of the last decade: work, society, and technology. So think about technology in particular. IBM has said your smartphones, so your iPhone, your BlackBerries, your Androids, have more computing power than the entire world did in 1950. Now think about that. Was anybody in school when you had to take punch cards down to a lab, you dropped them off and you got your computing done overnight, yes? And imagine, I mean, so I gotta ask, if you were to go back to school, sir, today, do you feel like, you have the potential, you could have been like, a NASA scientist, now, with the computing power that would have been available? There you go. So late nights, going down, next morning, pick them up, et cetera, right? Then the whole world, and as you guys probably know, you can't, the US government would not like you to take these sorts of devices to, I don't know, Syria, Iran, North Korea, et cetera. Axis of evil, Romney hasn't really played that one up yet. But, you can create atomic bombs with the computing power and these sorts of things, because that's what they did in the mid-20th century. All right, so we have trends in technology. We have trends in society as well. So we have a propensity to connect. If you're a music fan, if you remember a band called Radiohead put out an album called In Rainbows, and they put it all online. They said, download it and then pay us what you want. People are like, oh, are you guys nuts? Like, everybody's just going to download that thing and not contribute anything. But funny enough, I mean, they put out a regular, HMV version, Tower Records version as well. Funny enough, when they looked back at average sales, they actually made more per unit on average than if they had just set the price at a $12.99 or whatever, right? So we have these changes in society, ways in which we engage, interact, and expect to work with institutions. And think about how those societal and technology trends have filtered into our work. So take social computing trends of the last decade and think about how those start to impact your business and the businesses of your partners. So whether it's customers, so B2C, so direct consumer and customer engagement, whether it's employees, so worker-to-worker engagement, peer-to-peer, or value chain as well. You don't hear too much about social supply chain, right, and value chain. But that's a very critical part of this as well, B2B2C or value chain. So how do we start to apply these trends in technology, in society, into how businesses run and how industries operate? So take those three factors, and we actually have technology, we have computing constructs that are meant to support customers, business partners, and workers. And we know those today as the internet, extranet, and intranets. Now, I'm not going to say that those things are very effective, because you've got companies like HubSpot or Hootsuite or Jive, Yammer, Telligent, IBM Connections, et cetera, that are trying to make those things better, easier to use, et cetera. But we've got an enterprise ecosystem in play when we start to think about how these trends come to bear. So social business then means taking those trends, thinking about our business and technology constructs, and applying those across a framework. I'm not going to go too deep into these four items. We actually spent a lot of 2008 figuring out what is social business. If you remember 2008, it was an awful time to be starting a business, by the way. We were going into recession. And so as you can imagine, as a startup company, we had a lot of time to sit around and think about, well, what does social mean and why does it matter? And we came up with this idea of social business design. So culture, to whom are you connected and how? Connections, What is the strength of ties? How wide is your network? Participation. So what about content? What types of content are you sharing within those networks, within those weak and strong ties? And finally, analytics. How are you measuring, and why does it matter? Put those all together, and we're looking for high value, high scale, cost effective, and emergent business outcomes. Takeaway from there is if it doesn't move the needle on your profitability at the end of the day, if you're not moving business metrics, it doesn't matter. So when we talk about social business, we're talking about return on investment. We're talking about scalability. And we're talking about emergent outcomes, the kind of 3M Post-its or Nokia with smartphones, emergent outcomes that were not intended to be discovered. Okay, so let's talk about social business and that building a house, right? So first step, if you recall, you need to get a lay of the land, right? Like we want to be by the ocean, we get a lay of the land, just like something like this. And for social business, the way you get a lay of the land is by doing three things. Number one, defining goals and objectives, understanding the competitive landscape, and understanding the consumer or the conversation landscape. And so you've got to do these three things to start off with to get a lay of the land in social business. Pretty straightforward stuff, but you'd be surprised at how few companies actually bother doing this stuff. We see more often there's this knee-jerk reaction, right? We got to have social because everyone's doing it. Well, wait a second. What do we want to get out of it? Who's doing it? How's it done? So a good example of goals and missions, for example, would be setting up a mission statement. As you can see here, Mayo Clinic has a philosophy, mission, and vision that they put out there proudly for anyone to see. A lot of people say, especially with regards to traditional mission and vision statements, those are just nice words, right? Those are just nice things to put up on a wall or put on a laminated index card, you carry around your pocket. That being said, social is a new and emerging space. So if you've got a team or if you've got a client and they get asked, well, why are you guys around? Why do we need a social media center of excellence or a social media business unit? Well, they need to have an answer, right? We are here to help drive social business success or to help patient outcomes, be more effective, for the business. Okay, so don't overlook the mission and vision statement. Get a lay of the competitive landscape. So if you're in financial services, if you're in retail banking, for example, the bar is set. You have no choice but to be doing social customer service. So as you see here, 4 of the major banks, Bank of America, Citibank, Wells Fargo, and Chase, all using Twitter for customer support today. I think Citizens is great in here. So Citizens Bank has started to use that as well. This is just par for the course, because if you're going to be in banking, all your competitors are doing it, you need to do that. So depending on what industry you're in or consulting to, you've got to understand where the bar has been set. It's funny, now some of these actually have better traction than others. And thankfully, I'll tell you an aside, I guess this is one of those secret client confessions. So I was working with one of these 4 banks when they were looking to set up their social customer service Twitter account. And they said, yeah, we're all set. We've done training. We've got the handle. We're good. We've got legal on board. And so, next Monday, we've got the team photo ready to go. And I know it's kind of small, but if you see the Wells Fargo Bank, they've got it. If you see the Chase support, you can see there are actually 4 people in here, and there's like 4 in here, because that's like the customer service team, right? We are real people here on Twitter to support you. I guess that kind of narrows down who I'm talking about, right? So one of these other 2 banks was like, well, and we've got our photo shoot ready to go, because that's what you do when you're a bank using Twitter for customer service. I was like, dude, come on, man. Like, why? Do you have to get out the same colored shirts, polos with the logos, and everybody has a fake smile? Like, what does it mean to be your brand on Twitter? Why be like Wells or Chase? Well, the very honest response was because if we copy exactly what's been done before, it makes it a lot easier for us. But that's hard to argue with, right? Hey, Wells is doing it, Chase is doing it, so why not B of A or why not Citi, right? It helps get concerned executives more on board, follow the pack, but hey, we get our initiatives done. On the other hand, you've got your brand to think about and worry about as well, right? So there's a balance there. And so thankfully, some of them as you can see, broke away from the pack to some extent. All right, so we talked about getting a lay of the land, mission, vision, purpose. We're talking about competitive landscape. And finally, what about the consumer landscape? So what is the customer conversation like? And there are plenty of tools out there today. This is a tool from, used to be called Nielsen BuzzMetrics. Now it's NM Insight. Certainly, I'm sure there are Radian 6 users out there, or Scout Labs, Crimson Hexagon, et cetera. You've got to understand what's being said out in industry, right? And those three things will create the lay of the land for you in social business. So from the book, I felt compelled to put some examples from the book in here because it's the title of the session. So there are actually 10 tenets that social business by design revolves around, and I'm going to give them to you somewhat out of order. But tenet 8 is listen and engage continuously. And a short story here. How many of you remember Quickster last year? Very few, because right, it lived and died. How many of you are Netflix customers today? Yeah, loyal Netflix customers. So the thing about Quickster, if you remember last spring, they announced, hey, we're changing the name, we're changing our service. We're moving Netflix online, all streaming, and we're going to call this Quickster, and we're going to create this, we're going to have this old, CDs by, DVDs by mail. That's our old business. This is the future. So over the course of the year, what happened to Netflix stock was that they shed $2.7 billion in market capitalization, right? Now this was, you can adjust this for market trends, but yes, bottom line, they still lost a lot of money. Why? Because they did not listen to consumer preferences and get a sense for the customer landscape, right? So it's easy as that, one simple story. All right, so how to get a lay of the land. Determine why social. Remember that Mayo Clinic, why, what, where, when, who. What is par for the course? What do you have to compete against? What do you have to create? And finally, where do customers want to engage? What are they talking about? Why does it matter? All right, so step number 2, you got to lay the land. Let's talk about getting out with the old, right? Just like we talked about demolishing that house. There's old ways of thinking about social media and social media budgeting. So back in 2006, Best Buy had an internal social network called Blue Shirt Nation. So Blue Shirt Nation was created by Gary Kelling and a colleague, and it was skunkworks. There was no funding for it. These guys actually coded an internal social network to create connections between store-to-store employees. Gary actually it started out initially as a spare PC that the IT department had forgotten about, had lost, just under his desk, and that was used as a server for him to serve up Blue Shirt Nation. And it was pretty successful actually. Employees in the Braintree store could connect to the employees in the Plano store and figure out, oh, how is that new DSLR shelf talker supposed to work here? Because I got it and I have no idea how to install it. So employee-to-employee connections. Finally, corporate got hold of it, and there was actual proper budget put to Blue Shirt Nation. But that was 2006, and if you think about 2012, if you think about this year, and what P&G said, Procter & Gamble announces, we are shifting budget from traditional, less effective means of advertising, promotion, marketing into digital and, of course, by association, social. Because of successes like Isaiah Mustafa, right, Old Spice guy on YouTube, because we're seeing the traction and the success of those. So it's no longer the old way of thinking, well, yeah, we've got this traditional marketing, and my old company, we actually lost a couple pitches because ad agencies would walk in and say, oh, social? We'll give you all that stuff for free because you're paying for the TV, you're paying for the print, we'll give you the social stuff. We'll just add that on. It's kind of tough to compete with free, to be honest. But that's where budgets are going, and we're seeing millions. At first, it was beg, borrow, and steal when people were trying to do social. Now, we're seeing budgets in first in the single millions, now in the double-digit millions going to social. So pretty big deal. All right, so a tenet here, engage the right community. So when we're talking about getting out with the old, it's a way of rethinking how we approach our markets and how we budget for that. So I want to tell you a story from Austin, and from Austin, Texas. So when you live in Boston, as many of you do, you have an RDF, right, or which you take your trash down to the dump every weekend or twice a week. But down in Austin, we've got a service, right, a city-paid service that comes around, and they're called solid waste services. But As social computing, social media start to rise, Austin, City of Austin says, we're not really satisfied with solid waste services as our name. So we're going to crowdsource. We're going to idea storm. We're going to, get out there and say, well, public, what do you think, constituents, what do you think our name should be? So they used Spigot, if you can tell, if any of you are Spigot customers, as the back end. And they said, well, we've got 3 ideas for you. We could, we think resource collection and recovery utility sounds pretty good. Recycling and waste reduction department, or maybe resource recovery utility, But if you don't like any of those, why don't you suggest your own name? Okay. So the voting starts. People start submitting their own ideas. And in ascending order from least to most votes, this is what people started to say. I know the text is sort of small, so let me read you some of these. At the bottom, it's Austin Department of, are you going to eat that? Let's see. We have the Longhorn Alumni Society, which would be apt for a non-University of Texas fan, talking about the garbage department. UT grads, Texas folks, UT. Okay, good. So that's very appropriate probably for you. You're just like, yeah, that's right. I'm an Aggie fan, Texas Tech, et cetera. It's college football season, by the way, too. That's all that they ever talk about down there. But at the top, something that has nothing to do with Austin at all, the Fred Durst Society of the Humanities and Arts. By far, 29,000, when I took the screen, 29,786 votes, right? Dwarfing number 2, the Department of Neat and Clean. It's like, okay, I think we got Colbert here in some ways, right? Or we got had the Streisand effect, if you know what that means. It's Wikipedia, you should look it up. So obviously we chose the wrong community here. An old school department with an old school approach of how we set up a program. Very quietly, a year later, they changed their name to Austin Resource Recovery. So was it even necessary? Who knows? But we don't have trucks with a sideways head with a red baseball cap on backwards driving around Austin. So choosing the right community, getting out with the old, thinking about how we use new technology is critical. All right, so as we move into 2013 planning, it's how do we shift budgets away from programs with decreasing efficacy, thinking about programs with increased demand, and looking towards integration. All right, so in with the new. We talked about, so you got to have your new house, right? What's adequate? What do we need? Where does it sit on the plot? So when we talk here, it's the right organization matters. And now there's not a right answer for everybody. What we see that there's two things to consider. One, there's a process. Let's start at the bottom. And most companies start out as a divergent, right? Who the hell created this Twitter account here? Why are we on LinkedIn and not doing anything about it? So it's up to companies to help to corral their presences and to converge and create strategy around their brand management. And then ultimately you can distribute. You can decide how centralized you want to be versus decentralized, right? So a great example of a very decentralized approach to this is IBM. They've got about 400,000 employees, and many of those business units and people are empowered to do their own thing. On the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, you've got a Ford with a guy, Scott Monty, who's head of social media, and it's a very, I won't say controlled because that had some negative connotations, but it's a very centralized approach to corporate communications and social participation. And somewhere in the middle, you've got Dell with a combo of centralized and decentralized presences. Key question here that I always run into is, who owns social business? Is it marketing? Is it e-commerce? Is it IT? Is it corp comm? Is it public affairs? Is it all the above? Is it a centralized function? There is no right answer, to be honest, but organizations have to figure this out. Because as you can see, again, sorry for the small font, companies want essentially one throat to choke, so to speak, at the end of the day. If we get Nestle'd or if we get some sort of social media crisis going on, who am I going to pick up the phone as a CEO and call and say, WTF, like what's going on with this stuff? Right, so we need one throat to choke. Who's accountable and responsible, and how do they work with everyone else? All right, so lay the foundation. Out with the old, in with the new, then start to create your programs, right? So we lay the foundation, just like we lay the foundation of a house, we talk about creating process. So having a model where it all works together is key to making this stuff work. So I think as we talk about HubSpot, and you guys may be thinking what I'm thinking. Well, I got asked yesterday by a friend who said, Pete, what are you doing here? Because you talk about corporate strategy stuff. I said, I'll be honest, I'm not sure what I'm doing here. You guys may be wondering the same thing, because this, though, is the secret, in my opinion, to making HubSpot work. Because you can have all the technology you want, but if you don't have a process in place for getting departments involved, for using the data and making it actionable, then it's not going to mean a thing. It doesn't matter if you're using HubSpot, Eloqua, Marketo, Unica, you name it. You've got to have unified process and collaboration among departments and figure that out before you buy the software. All right, so one idea of laying the foundation is making sure that it integrates deeply into the flow of work. Because how many times, hopefully you've never been in a situation where you've got a new tool and no one uses it, right? I had a client once in the publishing industry. They spent $2 million on a Siebel implementation, right? The IT department went out and bought it. And then they sent a message out to the editors and their marketers and said, hey, the new Siebel system has been bought. The licenses are ready to go. Show up for your training, start scheduling it with us. And the response was overwhelming. They're like, what are you talking about? We don't want Siebel. We don't need this. We're fine with our Excel spreadsheets. That's fine. So no one actually ever ended up using this $2 million investment because there wasn't that communication. So certainly there are probably tools that you have, maybe an intranet or a micro-blogging service at work that you don't use. The secret is to making everything integrate deeply into the flow of work. Kind of like an example from CAPTCHA. If you know what a CAPTCHA is, it stands for Completely Automated Public Turing Test. Are you a human or are you a bot? Are you a spammer or are you a real person? And there's a lot of time that goes into CAPTCHAs. And if you think about what's going on with a CAPTCHA, you've got words. And there were two guys from Carnegie Mellon who said, can we make this a little bit more valuable? Can we use all the work that goes into solving CAPTCHAs every day and put all that effort into something useful? What they discovered is that there was actually a problem that could be helped, and that was with scanning digitized text, so old books. So if you've ever scanned a document and tried to use an OCR, optical character recognition software, to translate that from scan to digital text, you know that it's not always perfect. So for example, you see the underlined red words that the computer wasn't certain about, right? And of course, translated incorrectly, especially if you talk about Old English and that sort of thing. So what these guys discovered, they said, there is about 150,000 hours of work put in each day to solving CAPTCHAs. Think about that, right? I'm terrible at math. I was an English major. But 150,000, there are weeks and months of effort every day put into solving CAPTCHAs just because you wanted to think about Justin Bieber tickets, right, for your kid. I'm sorry. Or buy Yankees tickets, right? Or you wanted to get online and solve a CAPTCHA to get to whatever you're doing. So how do we harness that activity and integrate that deeply into the flow of work? Well, these guys realized that if we can create reCAPTCHA, so they would take one word that they already were certain of the translation for, but they blurred it, right? So this word is morning, for example. You have to type it in. We know it's morning, and if you get it right, then we know you're probably a human because you've solved this. And then we've got a second word that we actually don't know. That was a miss. And so if we get statistical significance, enough people solving this, typing the same word, then we know we've solved this issue and we can move on to another word. And so reCAPTCHA is helping digitize ancient text and putting some of that work, that 150 hours of work, to use each day. Now think about that. I mean, think about in your organization, if you could use the time, especially those of you who have, I see a lot of Macs, but those of you who use PCs, which I will never use again, from the time it takes you to turn on your computer and have Windows start up, I think like what I used to do, I would like go get a cup of coffee, go chat with some coworkers, catch up on what happened, some TV shows from the night before, and I'd come back and maybe my login screen would be there, right? What if you could use that work productively? What if you could use that time just like reCAPTCHA? All right, one other word here, when we talk about the foundation, culture is key. I mean, this is almost a cliche at this point, right? People matter, more so than technologies and strategy. Culture eats strategy for lunch, et cetera. But there is something to this. So if you had to describe your relationship with your work today, I want you to think about this for a second. If I had to ask you, Would you describe yourself on the spectrum from 1 to 7? Are you a 1? There's me, and then there's my job, there's the company I work for. Or are you closer to a 7? Man, there's me, and there's my company, and that's all me. How many of you would say you're a 1? If your boss is in the room, you can lie. How many of you would say you're a 1 on this scale? 1? Okay, thank you. I see you. I won't call you out, but I see you. How about 2s? 3s? 4s? Kind of in the middle, okay. 5s? Oh wow, 6s? And 7s. HubSpotters are all supposed to raise their hands on this one. 7s, right? Thank you. Okay, 7s. Yeah, and so the thing about this is that there's no right answer, to be honest. I mean, because different cultures have different ways of working. The key is understanding how your company works. We all have different ways of thinking about ourselves, and the key is understanding how your employees consider themselves as regarding your brand and their work and making that work. Because I'll tell you what, there is actually a known financial correlation to having good culture and financial returns. If you chart out the best companies to work for over the past 12 years or so, there's actually updated data from the Great Place to Work Institute, you see that these companies outperform the S&P 500. So there is a financial benefit to great culture. Okay, frame the structure. So just like putting up the walls, policies, playbooks, training, critical to make this matter. Coca-Cola has a great one. The websites, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook have started putting out their own education. And of course, training, making sure that all the front lines know what's going on, create baselines. Implement systems, just like putting in HVAC. Thinking about how you use your systems. For example, Nokia has used plenty of technologies in terms of social publishing. One idea here, another tenet from the book, ease of use is essential when we're talking about systems. So at my old company, thankfully, I don't have to do this ever again. We used a tool called OpenAir for time and expense reporting. And if any of you love your expense reporting system, I would love to hear about it so I can suggest that to my next employer. But for the most of us, I would spend, I think I spent about 4 hours at the end of each month putting in my expenses. Because as you can see, I had to go in and choose each item from the drop down or type something in, right? I said, guys, why can't I just like upload an Excel spreadsheet? This is a database, right? It's just a bunch of fields and rows. Like, no, Pete, that's not how the system works. You have to go in and select every item. Okay. Why can't our expensing system look like this, right? I just type it in. You know what this is, right? Google, right. Why can't it be like this? Or like this, like Socialcast or Yammer? I just type stuff into a box and it's done, right? So systems, ease of use is essential. Okay, and finally, measure in order to manage. It's a quote I've stolen here, Lord Kelvin, so just in case any of you happen to tweet that, don't attribute it to me, attribute it to Lord Kelvin, famous physicist. You need to measure in order to manage. And he used a bunch of like thous and ifs. He spoke in Old English, so. But you have to measure it if you want to manage it. Just like we have to measure our building a house. The key here, measure what you can control, not just what you can. Because you can measure plenty of stuff. There's plenty of dashboards out there. There's all kinds of metrics. But only measure things that provide insight for your brand and things that you can change and affect and make a difference in. That's actually, that's why I do love HubSpot. Everything that Dharmesh was talking about, those things provide insight, you can tweak it, and you can drive more business, right? Don't just measure for the sake of measurement. Remember, I worked at a company, gosh, I would be totally identifying the guilty, but there have been places I've worked where we had to create this presentation because the COO wanted a PowerPoint with a graph going up and to the right every Monday morning, seeing how well our programs are doing, right? No one really understood what the graph meant, but it looked pretty and it looked like we were being successful, so we were measuring just for the sake of measurement. Okay, if you're in a position like that, get out. That's my career advice. So Crimson Hexagon, for example, helping measure, right? Helping measure what matters. Great example, I think, one of the last independents and worth checking out if you don't know about them already. Okay, putting it all together. So we talked about this, building a house, and has anybody seen this documentary yet? Queen of Versailles. Yeah, no, yes, or maybe you've heard about this. Well, there's a guy, it's a true story, and a documentary that's been put together about a timeshare business owner. He's been building a house in Orlando, Florida that they have nicknamed Versailles. It's 90,000 square feet. It's got 30 bathrooms, a full-size baseball field, bowling alley, spa, servants' quarters. It's crazy. Problem is that the timeshare business went kind of south, and the bank is calling, for payments, and the thing is unfinished, kind of sitting there. But the movie talks about the whole story. And so, for better or worse, I think that's where we see a lot of social media, social business presences have ended up, like this idea of Versailles. Some people might call that a brand graveyard. So if you were on MySpace early on, think about brands like Honda Fit or Burger King's King on MySpace, right? And think about how active those things are. Those are like the Versailles of social business. So we want you to avoid that and create a social business by design. All right, so get the lay of the land. Remember, mission, vision, goals, competitive landscape, consumer landscape. Out with the old. How are you doing marketing today? How are you budgeting? In with the new. Where should you be reallocating dollars to? Lay the foundation. Think about culture and process. Frame the structure. Think about how things are going to fit into and align with your existing programs. And moving on to implementing systems, ease of use, and finally measure in order to manage. And with that, thanks for listening, and hope that was useful. Any questions, I'd be happy to take now.